Hi, so I'm just going to do a quick video on starting to work on threading with your child. If your child has mastered things like ring stacking and posting and you're wanting to move the fine motor skills along a bit, you can look at working on threading. So looking at the very earliest basic way, something like this, a nice solid stick, wooden pole. You could even just get a stick from your garden, and perhaps something like a curtain ring or a shower curtain ring. Most people have got these kicking around at home. They're slightly more tricky than the actual ring stackers because they're not quite as chunky, and as you can see, you've got to be a little bit more precise about fitting that over that particular stick. So we'd perhaps start there, if necessary hand over hand if they needed it to start with, but getting them used to the idea of threading onto something with something a bit smaller. We would perhaps then look to move them onto a much smaller solid stick. This here is like one of those balloon holder things, but it's ideal for doing this type of work. Again, you could start with your very big curtain rings, and again, it may be that you do the hand over hand with them to help them get it stacked onto there. So you just thread it on like that, and it's quite easy for them. If you then want to move it up and make it a little bit more challenging, you could use something like a cotton reel with the hole all the way through it. These ones are great because they've actually got holes all over, so they can thread it even if they don't get it dead centre. So that makes it easier for them to be able to thread it. But also they're still quite chunky to hold, so they've got something good to get hold of. Again, start with hand over hand, getting them to thread it until you feel that they're ready to attempt it on their own. But like I say, they're not quite as precise because you can actually just put it in one of the side holes even if they don't get it in the middle hole. So that's a really good one to kind of move it up and make it a little bit more difficult. So even more challenging is this type of cotton reel, this sort of little bobbin, because it's starting to get a bit harder to hold because it's smaller, but also it's very precise in where they need to thread. There's only one hole and it's quite a small hole for them to thread. So again, with this stick, threading it on hand over hand to start with, but getting them to thread that on to the solid stick. And then the hardest bit with the solid stick is your beads. I've got some with slightly different shapes here. If I just show you, all different shapes. So again, that makes it quite difficult because they're small and fiddly, as you can see, to hold on to. So they've got to be quite dexterous to hold it and then to thread it on as well because they're quite precise in threading. So again, doing that hand over hand. So that's really how you do it up to solid stick. You then could look at them moving on to using pipe cleaners, shoelaces, and a bit further on. But this really is, if you like, the first stage in threading, going from quite a large kind of solid stick thread with a much larger kind of easier to hold type of ring. There's a few examples of what I've found in and around the house. Moving it on to a smaller, slightly more precise type of threading, again where you're moving it on slightly harder but still not as hard, taking it down just that little bit harder, a little bit more dexterity required, and then the final one with your beads of being that much harder. So I hope that helps if you're looking at starting a threading activity with your child.